Welcome to the Let's Talk Growth podcast, where we focus on the topics that can help companies unlock their growth potential. Now here's your host, Bill Hupp.
Welcome to the Let's Talk Growth podcast, your go-to source for marketing expertise. I'm Bill Hupp, joined by the founder and president of MarketWise Advising, Mike Haldane. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Bill. It's nice to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you as well. Episode 2 of the Let's Talk Growth podcast. And today we'll be talking about research and how it can be used to enable commercial success. So let's start, Mike, with the need for market research. Why is it important to conduct research before launching a new product or service offering?
It's a great question, Bill, and it's one that I think a lot of people ponder. In my experience, and my experience at this point in commercial activity is pretty lengthy. It goes back several decades. But when I've seen businesses and products and services fail, it's oftentimes because there were some assumptions made about what was going to happen as this rolled out that just turned out to be wrong. And so the purpose of market research is to try to validate as much of that as you can on the front end, and then to come back and revisit it as you start to develop the strategy and even as you start to execute it. So market research, I like to say, is one of the first things that you do, but it's also one of the things that you do along the way, just to validate things that maybe you didn't think about up front. And so in terms of, why it's important so that we can get it right. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So if you look at some data, for example, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it indicates that only 25% of new business ventures make it 15 years or more. And there's a whole bunch of reasons that's the case, but a few of them are around not satisfying a need, or a business plan that either is not correct because the assumptions were bad, or where there's no business plan at all. And it can be things like inconvenient locations. That would mostly be for retail type applications, but location can make a difference. Lack of financing can make a difference. Being inflexible as things change can make a difference. And oftentimes what happens there is that the business works, for a few years, and then things start to change at the macro level, and the business doesn't adapt because it's not paying attention to what its customers are telling them or what the market is telling them. Or it could even be that a competitive force that's new has come into the marketplace, and market research wasn't done, and so nobody knew anything about what they did or how they did it or how they priced their products and services or that sort of thing. So a variety of reasons that you want to put market research in place. It's critically important for anything new, but it's also important for things that are a little bit more mature, because as we all know, the world changes every day, and this is true in business as well. So keeping up on those changes and adapting, whether it be the price, the product, how we go to market, the way that we talk about it, all of those things are critically important for the long-term success of any business. Whether it be, at the product level or at the business level.
What types of research are typically used in commercial efforts?
So there are several forms of market research, and I'll talk about each of them just to give a little bit of an overview of the types of things that we're talking about. So to start, there's primary research and there's secondary research, and I'll begin with secondary research. Secondary research would be things like big market studies that cover big market trends, macro trends, and that sort of thing, that maybe look at a big competitive landscape and determine market share and that sort of thing. These are studies that companies would normally buy. It's secondary because somebody else did the research and it wasn't specific to a particular company. It was a market report or something along those lines that companies want access to just to see what the big trends are. So that's oftentimes a place that companies will start. But when it comes time to defining what they want to do from a strategic standpoint, or with, various products that they may be considering and that sort of thing, they focus on primary research. So primary research comes in a couple of different forms, but it's research that is chartered by a particular company. And usually the way that they get that done is by hiring a market research firm like MarketWise that can go out and do that research for them in an unbiased way, and sometimes it's even blind, meaning that they don't want the people participating to know who the company is because they're not ready yet to go out with whatever that information is publicly. And so in the category of primary research, there is there are two types. One is qualitative and one is quantitative. Qualitative is more discussion based. So think of qualitative, for example, as a focus group. So you might say, we want to get some feedback on a new product concept in 5 cities around the country. And so we're going to hold a focus group in each of those 5 cities from 6 to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday in a given week. And we're going to have 8 people in the group, and we're going to have a discussion guide, and we're going to ask basic questions that will prompt discussion so that we can get some feedback on a new product concept that we're thinking about. That's qualitative research. It's not meant to be quantitative in terms of, we talked to 8 people in each group times 5, which is 40 people, and now we have a significant, sample size that we can make big decisions on. It's not that. It's to say, this is what we heard. Here's how it varied by city. These are general themes. It's meant to be directional and kind of point us in a place that we think we can be successful. That's a really good way to get started with a new product concept, but it's not a good way to think about things like pricing and other characteristics of the product and demographics and that sort of thing. Quantitative research is usually the next step. So once we have kind of a general direction and we want to start thinking about things like features and how to message things and the price and the sensitivity around that and the channel and so forth, we get some of that from qualitative research. But if you want to get quantitative data, you're going to have a much bigger sample size, and then you'll be able to analyze it statistically. So, sample size in that case may be several hundred people, not 40 people, or it could even be 1,000 people or more, depending on the population of people that you'll ultimately go after. But that's where you start to quantify things like, which message resonates, which feature is most important. Are there variations by geography? What's the right price point? How do people prefer to buy this product? And that sort of thing.
With primary research in mind, what can be done with qualitative and quantitative research respectively? What are some examples?
Yeah, so the best example of a qualitative study is what I said a few minutes ago, using the focus group as the example. Now that can be done in groups of 8, or it can be done one-on-one. It can be done over the telephone. It can be done live. But again, it's meant to be conversational with a few questions from a discussion guide that prompt the discussion, but it's meant to provide some direction to the company. And that's really kind of it. It's a first blush attempt to understand where the market wants us to go. Primary research that's quantitative in nature has a lot more that can be done with it. And that's where statistical tools and that type of thing start to come into play. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So let's just say that we're working on a product. This could be a business to consumer product. And let's say, without getting too specific here, let's say that the product we think needs to sell at about $100. So that might be one of the things that we want to go test with a survey. So the survey question would be designed to say, here's the product, here are the key features, what do you think this is worth? And we would give them a variety of responses, and we would get back quantitative answers. So let's just say that we tested at $100 and we got 85% response that were either likely or very likely to buy at that price point. Well, that's a really good first indicator that we're probably pretty close with the price, right? If 85% of the market is likely or very likely to buy, that's a really good thing to know. We might also want to know, if they're willing to buy this product at this price, where do they put the most emphasis? And we might say, well, we're gonna test price, we're gonna test support, we're gonna talk about references and styling and warranty and whatever other attributes of the product or the service we might be considering, and we want to get their take on what's most important. And so we might ask that question, and it might turn out that it comes back that at a price of $100, 80% put the most value on customer support. Well, okay, now we know a little bit about what the price needs to be, and we know a little bit about what the message needs to be, because we can see that 80% of those surveyed put the most emphasis on support. So this might be a technical product that requires a lot of support or documentation or what have you. So we know that our message needs to reflect that, and so it starts to inform what our advertisements and lead generation campaigns and that sort of thing should look like. We might take it a step further and say, okay, now let's try to understand price and customer support at the regional level to try to see if there are any differences between the Northeast versus the Southeast versus Midwest, or the Southwest or the Northwest or what have you. And we want to know if there are any differences in terms of the price point, or where the focus is from a customer support standpoint, whether that varies by geography or by customer type or any other demographic or psychographic category you might want to look at, because again, that will inform not just the message and the price, but also maybe how it needs to vary a little bit by geography or any other attribute of the customer base. It could be that we're serving multiple industries, and so one industry values one thing and another industry values something different. We'd want to know that because it's going to impact the way that we message and build our campaigns from a marketing standpoint as we're trying to create awareness, credibility, and lead generation.
Something I was thinking about as you were sort of answering that question is how much has technology changed research, improved it, made it easier, made it more compartmentalized? What has technology and even maybe the presence of AI meant for the amount of and the kinds of research you can do now as a company?
It's a great question, Bill, and it's changed quite a lot actually. So, back in the late 90s when I first started doing market research, I'll start with qualitative. It was exactly as I described it earlier, where you would go to 3 or 5 cities in a week and be live in front of people that were behind the one-way glass with everything being recorded, and a facilitator and a discussion guide, and we would go through a couple of hours of discussion, and it was a very much a live type environment. Nowadays, that still happens, and there are reasons to do it that way, but it's pretty simple to also do it remotely. So, I can get 8 people in a virtual room using Teams or Zoom or what have you, and have a very similar conversation. Now, I will say that it's easier to keep the audience engaged and everybody participating when it's live, but there are little tips of the trade that I can put into place to have that happen in a virtual environment as well. So, in terms of qualitative research, it can be done over Zoom just like it could be done in a focus group facility back in the day, and still today as well. From a quantitative standpoint, most of the data that we collect with quantitative winds up being with surveys. And so it used to be that quantitative surveys would happen with survey takers at shopping malls and that sort of thing. But nowadays, with tools like SurveyMonkey as an example, you can build a survey and do all sorts of analysis that wasn't possible back a while ago. And so I can design a survey on behalf of a client, and I can send it to their list of participants, or I can even contract through SurveyMonkey and other services like it to have that survey sent to people that meet certain criteria. So they could be leaders in marketing, or leaders in sales, or leaders in product development. And I can sort of partition off who I want it to go with, and I can choose how many participants I want it to go to so that I can get a significant sample size. And then once I get all that data back, I can analyze it with the tools that I've built from a MarketWise perspective, that look at all the statistical results that I want to look at, to be able to draw conclusions that inform the marketing strategy and the strategy for the business overall. How technology has changed. You mentioned AI. AI is an interesting component as well. So, there is a lot that can be done just by doing, searches with AI. All the major search engines have implemented AI now. And there is quite a lot, even if I look at SurveyMonkey has implemented a lot of AI as well. So, in terms of designing the survey, in terms of getting the survey out to the right people, analyzing the survey, and then being able to make determinations as to what the data and the analysis are telling you. There's AI is being pulled into all of those areas, and it's still pretty early, so we'll see how it all evolves. But it's a powerful tool, and I think AI is a game changer, just like the internet was back in the early 90s.
Yeah, definitely a transformative technology that a lot of companies and a lot of people are still just trying to wrap their heads around and try to figure out how to use it responsibly, and also make sure that the inputs are yielding the results that are authentic. This is kind of random, Mike, but have you ever seen an example where research can go wrong?
Sure. It's funny that you mentioned that because I was just thinking about this the other day. When I was in high school, I'm not going to name names here, but when I was in high school, there was a brand and a model that was pretty popular, and it was designed to appeal to, high school and college kids, young adults. So it had great styling, and it was built in a way that it was easy to work on, and so kids would modify it so that it had a certain look that sort of met with their personality and that sort of thing. And the company had done a pretty decent job of figuring out what buyers of that age were looking for, and they did a pretty good job of getting that part right, and having quite a bit of success in the market. But what got discovered after the fact was that this particular car had a tendency to have its gas tank explode when it was hit from behind. And so, although that may not have been a concern with, a teenage male at that point in his life, because, as we all know, they're invincible at that stage, it was a big concern to their parents. So all of a sudden, kids that had these cars were putting them up for sale, and kids that were considering buying those cars weren't allowed to do so. And so ultimately, that news got out, and sales started to slump, and ultimately the car went away. So that would be an example of where they got the things that they thought were important right, but they didn't get the things that were important to other people in the buying process that turned out not to be right. So an exploding gas tank is not something a parent is going to put up with. They want their newly licensed kids to obviously be safe when they're driving. Every parent's worst nightmare is that their kids would have an accident and that they would get a knock on the door. And an exploding gas tank is not what you envision as a safe vehicle. So it's a message about making sure that all the stakeholders have been talked with, so that people aren't going to, you might appeal to one set of stakeholders, but if you haven't appealed to all sets of stakeholders, those other stakeholders are going to kill your deal in the 11th hour, and you're not going to know what happened until it's too late.
Yeah, kind of missing the forest for the trees there, or the cart before the horse, whatever analogy you want to use.
Right.
That one little oversight like that, it's amazing though. That can, and then that wasn't a little oversight, it was a major oversight. But one major oversight like that can just totally sink, no matter how much else you get right in the process as you design it, in the design process. Just overlooking that means you can get everything else right, but that's such a big thing that it's, like you said, it's enough to have the car effectively killed off because of it. So
Exactly
with good reason,
right.
I might add.
Exactly.
But thanks so much, Mike, for joining us today on the Let's Talk Growth podcast to discuss the importance of research, different kinds of research, and how doing research well beforehand can help you enable commercial success.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Let's Talk Growth. If you enjoyed it, feel free to rate and review the podcast. You can get new episodes and listen to old ones by visiting marketwiseadvising.com/podcasts. Let's Talk Growth is owned, produced, and published by MarketWise Advising, LLC.